Okay, take a second and prepare a new quad chart for nuclear warfare as we move into Unit 3 um, of the Modern Warfare course, which is kind of appropriate titled the Cold War Hotspots. We'll start off with a little bit of nuclear warfare, and then we'll move into Korea and Vietnam conflicts. So, our essential question for today is what political and military theories and applications of nuclear warfare were used during the Cold War? And if you haven't done so yet, I want you to stop this video and go back. And I posted a couple of videos for you guys to watch during this week or before we get into class this week. And this first video is by a scholar titled "I've studied nuclear war for 35 years, and you should be worried." He talks a lot about how they advised the President of the United States and the Premier in the Soviet Union to start to disassemble their nuclear warfare. And it really gives a lot of great examples about that. So before we get really started on this, I'd like you to stop and watch that if you haven't already done so. Great quote right up front, by Sagan. The nuclear arms race is like two sworn enemies standing waist deep in gasoline, one with 3 matches, the other with 5. And I think that appropriately represents what we dealt with during the Cold War. Because with a theory of mutually assured destruction, it didn't matter who fired first. Eventually, both of these countries and potentially the rest of the world was going to erupt in a lot of just fire and destruction. But how do we get there? So at the end of World War II, really, we see a broken world. The Soviets suffered immeasurably with the loss of over 25 million lives. Japan is completely in ruins. Its economy can't sustain itself. Its merchant fleet has been sunk. Its industries are completely destroyed. China was leveled and destroyed by the Japanese, leaving nationalists and communists to fight over what was left in that country. And like World War I, America, protected by 2 oceans on the borders and a great bit of distance, was left pretty much unscathed. We come out with a great economy. We come out with the only nation in the world with nuclear weapons at this point in time, and really a leadership position in the world that is unrivaled. Meanwhile, Japan, Germany, and Great Britain are completely, shells of what they used to be. And this really leads to tests on the peripheries of our own sphere of influence, right? As a world leader, where are we going to be able to assert ourselves? And we no longer see these large, massive armored combat operations or even army and naval operations. What we see are these small hotspots that kind of fire up in Korea and Vietnam and Eastern Europe. And the term we use is low intensity conflict. So if you see great big maneuver warfare, what we had in World War I and World War II with massive deployments and logistics, low intensity conflict is just that. It's low intensity, kind of burns underneath the radar, and these types of activities continue to go on and on, sometimes for years. We sponsor NATO, right? And we become kind of the prime capitalist sponsor in Europe, and we're opposed really by what has come together of the communist bloc of the Soviet Union, and they formed this alliance to counter NATO called the Warsaw Pact. You can see that definite line right down through Europe that separates communism from really capitalism and free societies in those two organizations. So science takes a primary front in the new war, and in the development of nuclear weapons. Our goal is to deter the Soviet Union. And the theory of containment, Truman's theory of containment, was thought that if we could contain communism in its existing location, it would fail to spread. But if we allowed it to get into those neighboring nations, there's nothing we could do to stop it, and it would just continue to take, nation after nation after nation. They call this the domino theory, and the way we try to do that is really through a large nuclear arsenal. It's cheaper to maintain nuclear weapons. It's cheaper to build and have them in the arsenal ready to go. It's cheaper to do that than it is to outfit a standing army with weapons and equipment, paychecks, family, allowances, healthcare, all the things that come with a large standing army are obsolete, or at least that's what we thought during this time frame, was it was going to be obsolete because we're going to maintain this large nuclear arsenal. Heck, we just ended a war and stopped a major invasion of Japan with dropping 2 of these bombs. Imagine if we had hundreds of them, what we could do. Just kind of defer war, and it would never happen again. The Air Force takes the primary role in this, and they were known in the 60s of saying nuke them till they glow, and then we'll shoot them at night. So they had this whole idea that we weren't going to need to ever even see pilot-to-pilot combat, that we would be able to send these large intercontinental ballistic missiles, or we might these intercontinental bombers over long ranges, and we'd never put people in harm's way again. And that was their focus, really, of the Air Force through the 1980s, primarily the main defense of the United States. The Soviet strategy is just try to hang on, right? We're building in America better technology, better weapons, kind of like we always have. And the Soviets, kind of like they always have, they're dealing with numbers. Where in World War I and World War II, they really were dealing with numbers of men. Their buildups of both nuclear weapons, tanks, anything they could do was quantitative. So the more they could build, they believed they were keeping up with us. And honestly, from the Soviet perspective, more was winning. But they were never able to keep up with us technologically. We could have fewer weapons, fewer tanks of higher quality, and it doesn't matter how many more they would put out on a battlefield or how many more they would have. The end result was going to be the same. And brilliantly in the 80s, Reagan uses this to break the economy of the Soviet Union. We built so much and so much better that they could never really keep track with what the United States was doing, and it forced their economy into failure. And here you can see kind of an example of that. And you see a couple of dips where we enter some things times in our history when we're fighting in wars. But initially, a very, very steep buildup of weapons, higher technology. The Soviets don't have that technology. As they gain it, they start to build it, and they ramp up a little bit slower until we get into this area in the 80s right here, taken toward the end of the 1980s, where the Soviet Union really gets broken and falls off steeply. Also kind of coordinated with some treaties where we both had to reduce our nuclear stockpiles. We see dips in our own history, like right here during the Vietnam War, and then shortly after we start tapering off, and then that sharp drop off again with the Soviets as we start reducing our nuclear production. There's some differences here on both the military and the civilian leadership side in Congress. Like, why would we use nuclear weapons, and how would we use nuclear weapons? So, the military has a very different aspect of these options, particularly when it comes to quick defeats or denying a specific area by using this weapon and putting contamination out there. And we see that pop up in Korea early on when General MacArthur would like to use these weapons as an area denial munition to keep the Chinese from coming in to North Korea, and he was denied that by Congress. Congress believes they are really a last resort, and they should be withheld and not used in a tactical manner. And then there's the conversation of, do we take a first strike, or do we wait until we're have something happen and then we use a retaliatory strike? So in any case, this results in mutually assured destruction by this time. Once the Soviets have these weapons and we have these weapons, it's kind of assumed that if we launch one, they're going to launch an attack. If they launch one, we're going to launch an attack. So we start to see the shift in the strategy in what the target would be. And instead of using it as an area denial weapon, instead of using them as something to blow up a city, our primary targets become the enemy weapons themselves. So we're developing a technology that's going to be so precision that it's going to land in a missile silo and destroy an enemy's missile silo. And the Soviets do that as well. That becomes our first strike capability. Second strikes would be when we would go ahead and destroy the major cities, and this continues the the theory of mutually assured destruction, where entire populations are in fear, they're held hostage. During this time frame in the United States in the 60s, all the way up to the 80s, people were building nuclear fallout shelters on their property in the backyard, something that had an air exchanger on it, and they could crawl inside of and survive a nuclear blast, and then have some food supplies in there where they could live for a period of time while the nuclear fallout and contamination was happening, until it was safe to come back outside. And the idea, again, that both countries would completely destroy each other if necessary. Another thing we both do is we put specific types of weapon on high alert with quick launch sequences. And that's simply there in case the enemy does decide to attack. If the Soviets attacked us, we've got weapons that are constantly ready to fire, and that can be in the air almost immediately. And the Soviets have the same exact capability. Here we have a photo of, this is what's called a thermobaric weapon, and this weapon uses oxygen plus fuel to create an incredibly hot explosion. You can see what it's doing is it's exploding a little bit above this building, and the heat and fire are projected down into that building. The result of this is massive burns and concussion on a human population, but it leaves the brain alive. So it causes an incredible amount of suffering. This is the type of weapon that we were dealing with throughout the entire Cold War. Who could make these, better, bigger, more accurate, and really hold more domination and over civilian populations? This one's the Tsar Bomb, and the Tsar Bomb is still today the largest nuclear weapon in the inventory, and it's held by the Soviet Union. It's never been fired at anybody. It has been tested, but you can see the firebomb. This is over New York City. This is over Manhattan down here. So the firebomb is something that is significant enough to completely flatten Manhattan Island, have significant effect all over the state of New York. And then we continue to evolve, right? Hydrogen bombs are the next thing to come off of the nuclear technology, and this uses nuclear fission, and it produces a bomb 25 times the yield of what we dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So again, building bigger bombs to do more damage becomes really the goal of the Americans. 450 times more powerful than some of the new technologies that we've developed. It releases the power capable of fueling the sun. In this graphic, it shows the bottom of 15 kiloton bomb, which is what we dropped essentially in Hiroshima. And this is the 15,000 kiloton bomb that we would have in the inventory today. So this delivery system that we have to have is based on 3 tiers of the nuclear triad. The first one is the strategic bombers that can go all the way around the world carrying a nuclear payload and drop it. That's the first wave that we're going to send up. This is the F-117 Stealth. It carries the B-61 nuke. It's a 0.3 kiloton bomb. It carries multiples of those. Very, very difficult to detect these stealth aircraft. The second phase, or the second wave of this type of an attack, are intercontinental ballistic missiles, and we'll fire them from the United States, or potentially some of our shorter range missiles that are located closer to targets that would be in theaters in Europe or in the Pacific. But these deliver long distance payloads as they increase. Something I'll point out here, as they launch from one location into another continent, they get to its apogee up here, it starts coming back down. Once it hits its reentry phase, it cannot be redirected. We can disarm and redirect this missile all the way over to here. Once it hits the reentry phase, it cannot be redirected, and it's going to go and hit its target. Global impact, obviously, with the ability for one nation from its home field to launch a missile and impact another nation is both strategic and tactical in its application, and probably why you see the United States so heavily involved today in negotiations with countries that are attempting to develop this capability, like North Korea and Iran. I mean, the capability in hands of somebody who is unstable, or a government that is unstable, is dangerous. Again, we've used these twice in the entire history of the world. We know the damage that it can cause. And if you went back and watched that video on really the results of nuclear war, even on a small scale, to all of human civilization. We don't want these types of things falling into unstable hands. Here we have a depiction of just several different types of nuclear weapons. And the one I want to talk about is this one right here. It's the SS-18. And the SS-18 is one that it's a Soviet missile. It's one the Americans called the Satan nuclear missile. It's a first strike mission that the Soviets developed, and its job specifically was to penetrate underground to our nuclear silos. Back to that, first strike, going at attacking the capability rather than attacking the population. But it really gives the Soviets, or gave the Soviets, a first strike advantage over the United States. It was capable of carrying 10 warheads. Each of those 10 warheads GPS programmed into a different missile silo. If they had accurate information on where our silos were, you could assume that it would penetrate in there and it would detonate a 750 kiloton bomb that was 50 times more powerful than the bomb we dropped on Hiroshima. And it's also capable of being outfitted with a single warhead, a 2.4 megaton bomb, which is 200 times more powerful than what we dropped in Hiroshima. Kind of like the Satan rocket, the multiple independently targeted reentry vehicles, MIRV, that's what that one that had multiple warheads on it, is a capability that both countries had and possess today. So once the rocket reaches its apogee, instead of just kind of cresting back down into reentry phase, it actually launches multiple nuclear warheads. And again, once these are free and released from this stage, they are in reentry. They're GPS guided. And they're going to go to their target, and there's nothing that we can do to call them back. We've got some that carry 10, maximums that carry are up to 12. And the final leg, the third leg of the nuclear triad, are nuclear submarines. And nuclear submarines will stay submerged for up to 5 months at a time. And the mission of this sub, carrying its nuclear warheads, is if nuclear war ever happens, they submerge, they go silent. They've got orders that are on the subs at all times. And at a certain point in time in the future, they are supposed to surface, launch their warheads, and then go back underwater, thereby sealing the fate of the nation that we're at war with. And again, 3 legs in the nuclear triad are really what give this technology, this capability, the power behind mutually assured destruction. This final video, and I'm not going to play it on here, but I hung it up in Schoology as well. Go back and watch it. It's only a few minutes long, but it through a digital graphic representation shows every nuclear bomb that's been dropped on the Earth. So it starts in Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and then it goes to some of the tests, and it tracks which countries had them all the way through our reduction in the 1980s and 90s. So it'll show you every one that's ever been dropped on Earth. And when you look at it, I want you to consider this area of the map right here, right around Las Vegas. And if you haven't looked at any of the historical data on there, we did so much testing out there that once you see this, you will probably never want to travel that area again. There's so much residual contamination in the deserts between Utah, Nevada, and Eastern California, that's a place you should probably never visit. But take some time, watch that, and then we'll talk about that a little bit in class.